All right, thanks for joining me. We're just, as always, trying to get started just a minute or so early here just to make sure everything's working. For those of you who were watching last week and I had the fuzzy, unfocused camera here, I figured out how to fix that next time. So hopefully it doesn't happen again, but if it does, I'll know how to fix it next time. So sorry about that for those of you who were there. I know that did not make for very interesting live stream content last week, so sorry about that, and hopefully we won't have a problem like that again. This time, it's not happened before, so it's fairly unusual. Some of you might know I've been in the process of trying to basically moving down this road to get a studio set up that's closer to home. And so it's important that I'm understanding as much as possible any of the technical challenges that exist out there in the process. Just a quick reminder for those of you who have not seen this before or are new to the process. When I'm asking, this isn't Ask Me Anything live stream, so when you ask a question, depending on what you see on your screen there, either to the left or the right or even down below, depending on what type of screen you're looking at, when you ask a question, try to put the @We the Governed in it so I know that it's actually a question. I can see them on the screen here as they pop up, and generally I'm trying to get to the questions before the commentary, and oftentimes there's a lot of commentary back and forth, which is fine, but it's hard for me to find a question sometimes in the middle of that, and I do sometimes miss questions that people ask. So if you do this like I've done down below, it makes it just a little bit easier for me to find it. There's also a couple things I was going to jump to here. As always, when I'm doing a lot of these live streams, I do try to start out based on requests of people in the past, and I've tried to give an outline of just a couple of different events that I'll be at in the near term. So if you want to see me in person or you want to come up and say hi, then these are some events that you can come and see me at. And so I've got 5 Doge training classes coming up in the next month. About a month. And so I'll run through these real quick for you. If you want to know more details about that, it is at wethegovern.com on my website. I've kind of left up an old article that I'm just updating with the new changes to the classes as we finish them and complete them. So for those of you who were in Marysville for our second class that we've done up in Marysville, wasn't really intended as a part 2 to the first Doge Washington class, but it was a second one that I've done at that Reset Church up in Marysville. Smaller group there last night. Beautiful day. It's always hard, I think, on a nice summer evening to necessarily want to go indoors and learn how to uncover corruption and financial issues in local government. But so it was good to meet some of the people that I hadn't seen before last night. And there is another one coming up this Thursday out in Sawant County in Friday Harbor, June 19th. And the information, again, is on the website at We the Govern, so I'm not going to jump through all the details of the locations. But the next one's going to be in Enumclaw on the 23rd, which is a Monday. The one after that's going to be in Silverdale, Kitsap County on the 26th. And then I have 2 scheduled in July already. One is in Lewis County on July 14th, and one is in Clown County on July 17th. And so the information for those locations, it is in the website. Most of them start at 6 o'clock with registration about 5:15. Gives you enough time to get there, get your handouts, get settled in. First come, first serve for the most part, but most of the information's there on the website. Should be pretty easy for you to spot and figure out for yourself. The one thing I want to point out is that in addition to those, I believe this Saturday, I'm probably going to be stopping by Clown County. I'll probably see you at the Lincoln Day dinner up there. That was a little more impulsive change that I've made recently. So I will probably be there. I believe Brian Haywood's the main speaker there. So it'll be fun to see some of my friends out in Clown County about a month before I'm coming out there to do the Doge training classes, Doge Washington training. So I'm looking forward to seeing you if you are in Clown County this weekend. So bouncing all around the state, nothing in Eastern Washington the next month and a half. If you want to change that and you have a reason for me, I think a Walla Walla would be a good place that I haven't gone to yet. Vancouver, for those of you in the Vancouver area. And also more, I know I have the Enumclaw event coming up, but other King County locations. There's a high volume of interest in obviously the more populated areas of the county, so Pierce, King, and Snohomish. So if you want to organize more events out there, find a church or a venue that has a low cost sort of ability to put on an event there, and make sure you have other people that are interested in that as well. And I'm happy to schedule a time. You know, then we'd have to coordinate on which day would work, and come on out and see you then. So I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of people. We've had about 500 people go through the Doge Washington training so far. I anticipate quite a bit more in the near future. It might be a little beyond, it might be getting closer to 600 now, but it's in that ballpark. And so a lot of people are interested and engaged and involved in this stuff. And I'm seeing a lot of people kind of come together around the state, come to the same conclusions, I should say, in different methods and tactics and strategies to make an impact and a difference. So excited to see you out there and to talk to you if I see you out there in public. Also, just a number of people I do get approached frequently in public if you see me at Costco or at Fred Meyer or Safeway or someplace like that, getting gas, whatever. If you watch my channel or even if you watch these live streams, feel free to come by and say hi. I always appreciate it. Even if it looks like I'm busy, that's just kind of the way I look. I'm always appreciative and always honored that there's actually people out there who watch this show and who pay attention and share it with others. So I like meeting new people all the time, so make sure you come on up and say hi. It won't bother me at all. I realize there's a lot of people that don't do that, but I also do get approached by quite a few people in public now, and I like the feedback. If you do come up, say, Glenn, this is what I would change, or this is what I like, or this is what I don't like. Any kind of feedback like that is good. I have very thick skin. You're not going to offend me. I'm just always interested in what people's true interests and motivation for watching, or what got you inspired to watch this channel, or what you like the most or what don't like the most about it. That's always helpful and interesting to me. So one of the things, let's get to some of these questions here and try to jump right in. The original point I think I was going to make maybe before I jump into these questions is just a real quick overview. For those of you who saw whatever limited media coverage there was of the No Kings rallies that were around the state of Washington this weekend, you know that they weren't covered that accurately. And it was amusing to me to some extent, of course, to see, amusing is the wrong word. If you saw Jason Rantz and Brandy Cruz and you see some of these other people who actually are independent media and so they're reporting on what's actually going on in these events, you're seeing that there are people who are assaulted and threatened and harassed and attacked. And of course, the Seattle Times and the traditional media just ignore it every time. So there's no scenario, if you are ever going to know the truth, if you're subscribing to Seattle Times, there's a cloud of silence that definitely covers that newspaper, as well as the whatever's left of it, whatever people might call themselves, journalists that still work there, or King 5 News or anything like this. You'll never get the real story of what's going on. So paying attention to the independent journalists and the growing group of people that are starting to pay attention to what independent media has to say in Washington State, because they're going to be far more accurate than whatever the corrupted media is being told to say. I think that these protests kind of were an illustration, an example of that this weekend. The funny thing that I did notice, and I did a video about it today, I did 2 videos today, one of them is actually about the No Kings protest and the funny contrast and the fact that you had Inslee there pretending like he cared about not having a king and that one king was too much. It wasn't clear if he was referring to himself, but it was just very... it was a funny contrast, and I did a video just showing, nobody's been more abusive in the governor's position than Inslee was, and obviously Ferguson might try to beat him to that winning crown of being the more abusive guy. But it's just interesting to see what was going on there and how the media covered it versus what was really going on. And hopefully I did a good job with that video, and I'll probably be launching that one tomorrow. So let's get into some of these questions. You have questions, and hopefully I am going to be able to answer them, or at least do the best I can to answer them. And the first question I have up here is from Charles Hetrick. And this is the real question is, why did the Tim Walz appointee who did the bad stuff over the weekend not get charged with premeditated bad stuff? He clearly had a plan and list. Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't put too much stock on the initial charging documents that are filed against somebody who's committed a significant felony, as the attempted assassin did. Well, successful assassin and then attempted assassin for some other people over the weekend, the guy out in Minnesota. The one thing is that prosecutors have the discretion and ability to add to the initial charging charges that they bring against somebody. They're initially going to file charges that they know are going to allow them to hold that person in custody while they're probably conducting search warrants and a little bit more of an investigation into what they're doing before they finalize all the charging documents that they have against this guy. And obviously, he's going to, the assassin's going to probably get into substantial amount of trouble, considering the evidence they seem to have against this guy is pretty solid. And not just the fact that he killed a couple people and wounded 2 more, but he also went to several other homes where either people weren't home or they didn't answer the door. And so he clearly had a plan to assassinate or kill a lot more people than he did, which is fortunate that he didn't get more than he did. And it does look like he had some kind of a significant plan put together. The funny thing, funny's the wrong word. I mean, the bad thing about all this stuff is instead of recognizing that anybody who's out there committing political assassination or doing something like this, inevitably it always gets politicized in the same way that we see mass shootings or somebody go out and do something that always gets politicized. And fair enough, right? Fair game. You can go and politicize this stuff. But when it's a political person like this, and especially a troubled person who's got a weird background, and the fact that Governor Walz did appoint him to a position is one thing. The fact that the 2 Democrats that he shot were the ones that joined the Republicans on the recent vote to not give health care to illegals in Minnesota, that's probably significant in some way. But there were other people on his list, so we'll see as we learn more and it gets out there a little bit more. I've noticed and read a recent article about the shooting down in Utah at the No Kings rally down in Utah. Or now, I don't think that one turned into a riot, although one of the things is they had some crazy guy there. It turned out, I thought it was like law enforcement who actually shot the guy, but it turned out it wasn't. It was like a self-appointed security guard who was untrained, looked like a crazy person, and he was not exactly great, highly effective with his firearm, and so he shot both. The person he killed was actually just an innocent bystander, and then the person that he was worried about as a threat, or at least what they're saying was a threat, it's not even clear that he was, and he wounded that person. That was a good little kind of, we're learning more about that story as it goes along. But, when you're in these big groups and there's a lot of potential for violence, and especially if you're in Portland or you're in LA or New York or Chicago or Seattle or someplace like this, and they get a lot of bad people that are going to be tied into these rallies. The rally itself, the protest itself, that's legitimate. That part of it just simply serves as cover for the people who are coming in and want to commit actual violence. And they know it. And it's not an accident. It's well planned. We're seeing the same things over and over again. The frozen water bottles at the Tukwila facility, that actually takes some planning ahead of time. Somebody's buying the water, they're freezing the water, they're bringing out garbage cans full of water. There's logistics of these frozen water bottles, and they're a perfect missile to then throw at police or throw at people you don't like. And if you get hit in the head with a water bottle that's been frozen, it's just like getting hit in the head with a rock or any other hard obstacle like that. You can really object, I should say, you can get hurt quite a bit. And it's never fun. I mean, I was around a couple of crazy events when I was a student in college, and I remember counter demonstrating once at a so-called anti-war rally, so-called peace rally, right? And I remember these guys coming out of the protesters with chains and baseball bats to attack us, and it was an interesting experience because I was a little naive. It was the first one I'd ever been to, and we were counter demonstrating, go USA kind of thing. And here these guys come out with baseball bats and chains, and we had American flags, fortunately with flagpoles, that we could hold them off a little bit until the NYPD surrounded us with their horses and really saved us. We would have probably been hurt pretty badly if that hadn't happened. And that was back in the 90s. So nothing's really changed. A lot of times these types of events, especially the ones organized by anarchists or Leftists, violence is always part of the equation. They always come prepared to commit violence and take advantage of it. You're also, because that's a known feature of them, you're also going to have criminals in the audience. They don't have anything to lose. And we don't even know all the groups and people that are, of course, involved and engaged and ready to burn cars and break in and loot stores. It's kind of this opportunity to use the protest as a cover for a lot of these types of violence. And so you can get really hurt in these events and assaulted, as Brandy Cruz was assaulted Saturday, and as other journalists have been assaulted before, independent journalists, of course, they get assaulted, and presumably the journalists with the Seattle Times, these other places, they don't get assaulted because either they have good security there that are paid to be around them and protect them, or they work out some kind of a deal where they promise they're just not going to report the truth. I don't really know for sure what it is, but anyway, so that's the kind of thing that does go on at these events, and I don't find it super. You don't want to be caught up in that kind of a melee or a chaos or fighting if you can avoid it, and I would generally try to avoid it if you can. Let's drop down to the next question here. Brian Krasowski. How can we stand up to Antifa when our local leadership won't? And that's a great question. Listen, I think a lot of this is about cutting off the money. A lot of these groups, the only reason you're going to see them in a significant number at all is that somebody's funding them and somebody's funding the operation that lets them get out there. Obviously, if you saw Peter Schweitzer and some of these other people that have been doing a lot of work in researching the dark money operations that go behind Riot Inc. or the gold bars off the Titanic, that how many of those are being, all that money that they kicked out of the feds or USAID, where they're taking that money and then recycling it back into activities like this kind of color revolution sort of activities, then if that money dries up, most of that type of organized violence probably disappears. Not all of it, because you're always going to have people who are willing to go out and do bad things given the opportunity, but you're going to at least see the larger structure that supports that kind of stuff going away. If you've ever actually organized an event, and I've been involved in organizing a number of protests over the years, it's not my favorite thing to do. I think it's, there's only three values, at least from a conservative perspective anyway. If you're organizing a rally, there's three reasons to do it, essentially. The three reasons that I think you see as benefits long term. Number one, it gives you the ability to it's a show of force in the sense that there's a big group of people out here and they're opposed or they support the policy that you're out there to discuss or present. So that's a value of a rally and a protest. Then the second thing is to support the people who are showing up so they know they're not alone. That's also valuable. This particularly was true during the lockdowns or the anti-tax rallies back in 2009. If you were there with the 6,000 people that showed up at the state capitol in 2009 during the Tea Party era, these were big events that a lot of people showed up and they realized, hey, we're not alone. Just because the media is giving us the censored, approved, government-approved story, we find out that there's actually a lot of people that share our concerns about taxes or about an opposition to Inslee's lockdown world, whatever it was. So there's value there. And the third value is the ability to document the rally for future posterity. So whether taking pictures of the signs, taking pictures of the event, if you're doing a rally that's not approved by leftist special interests, they're always going to try to ignore it, pretend like it never happened, change the numbers of the people who were there, and they're going to try to put it in the memory hole and make it disappear. So documenting that and then using that for social media documentation in the future, I find that to be helpful. If you can't do those three things, can't get enough people together to make it worthwhile, and then you're not going to be helping people realize they're not alone, and you're not going to be documenting anything that anybody cares about, and it's a lot of energy and a lot of time to put into an event that it isn't easy. It's very hard to get thousands of people at an event. It really is, unless you are paying for it. So if you're going to pay for that, like like these rent-a-mob companies and organizations that do this, where they bus in people and they're paying them to show up, and they're bringing them food, and they're bringing them signs, and they're bringing all that stuff paid for ahead of time. That's going to be a very different type of operation. That mostly exists only on the left. They seem to have that much money that they can, spread out there and do these things. And it doesn't matter whether it's MoveOn.org or One America or Fuse Washington or whatever group it is that the names change all the time. The players tend to be the same people usually. And it's not uncommon. I remember when I was in college, you'd have like 70 groups sponsor this protest on campus, but there's only 12 people there. So how could there be 70 groups sponsoring it and so few people show up? Well, it's because there's really just a handful of people that are actively involved in all these groups, and they can't get enough people to show up on their own. And so that's probably what started the business that you see out there now, where these companies essentially provide people to make a rally look like it's well attended or there's a lot of people there. So it's kind of amazing that there'd be that many people that they can get out there. And not everybody out there is paid, but a decent percentage of them are. And then, of course, you just build up the hype and the momentum and the advertising that isn't as free as people think it is. It takes a lot of money and time to do that. And so it's very hard to get a rally where you get that many people out, let alone a coordinated rally in hundreds of cities at the same time. It's not free, costs a lot of money, and they have a lot right now to spend. The question is, how much of that's our taxpayer dollars? And that, my friends, is worth digging the research up to find out what's happening. Berserker. What changes can we expect to happen if we don't have voter ID and the ability to vote in person? Seems like everything is pointless till our voting system is overhauled. Well, you still somehow have victories and changes even with mail-in voting and without ID being shown when you vote. So not showing up is only a guaranteed handout to the bad guys every time. Now, that being said, what I'm kind of expecting to occur is there are going to be changes to the election system in Washington State. I think this is true regardless of whatever our Secretary of State thinks. And there's going to be a lot of resistance to the change, but some things are just going to end up changing. If for no other reason than the deadline that's coming up, and I got to double check the date, it's coming up right now, where the Department of Homeland Security releases the lists of non-U.S. citizens that have been registered to vote in Washington State, mostly by the Department of Licensing. And Homeland Security will produce that list, and that helps kind of peel back layers of the onion and exposing the reality of the overfluffed voter rolls with a bunch of people that are not legally allowed to vote. And then the question becomes, how many of them actually voted, which I don't know. I don't know that answer. None of us do until we get those lists. And the people who have control of those lists are, they are the feds, because they are the ones that have the visa lists, H-1B visas, J-1 visas, whatever visas are for the legal people that are here for legitimate reasons. They're allowed to be here, but they aren't allowed to vote unless they're a U.S. citizen, even in Washington State. So finding out how many of them registered to vote, and the answer is generally most of them, and then finding out how many of them have voted is going to be a relevant piece of information to lead towards future changes inevitably in the voting system, if for no other reason, just removing those people from the voting rolls. The question is, what kind of drama and pushback is going to occur? Remember, the Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, was set up to be a liar because they trotted him out there, and he said there's nothing wrong, none of that's happening, it doesn't exist at all. The employees who work for him know that it's happening. Everybody knows that it's happening. I can't believe Steve Hobbs is dumb enough not to know that it's happening. I also don't believe he would openly and outright lie unless he really believed that what he was being told was true, for the most part. And so the fact that he was basically went out and lied like that, and that it's a demonstrable lie that can be proven pretty soon, that's going to lead to a different set of circumstances. Now, the difference, too, is that the Homeland Security list, supposedly, assuming they follow the executive order and they release this list, it's also going to have the people who are not U.S. citizens at all and they're here illegally, who are registered to vote and given Social Security numbers and all this other stuff. Now, that's coming out of some of the Doge, federal Doge work overlapping with the Homeland Security information that they'll release. And when that information comes out, I think it's pretty insightful when we look at it. I wouldn't anticipate seeing that a huge percentage of those people have voted, but remember, in the Public Lands Commissioner race, for example, the difference between having 2 Republicans in the final general election and having a Republican-Democrat in that general election at the primary level there's a 50-person margin. So even 50 different people having voted illegally across the state, or being suppressed across the state, or some of the combination would have been enough to completely change who would be public lands commissioner today, as an example. And there's many examples like this, especially in local government races. So even smaller changes like that, where you just clean off the voter rolls, and you take 150,000 non-U.S. citizens that are on the voter rolls that shouldn't have been on the voter rolls in the first place, that changes a lot of calculations on voter turnout. It has other types of impact. So we will see. Let's see. Next question here. Andrew Constantino. A lot of my close friends in Seattle and Portland have really become radicalized in their beliefs over the past few years. I try to have conversations with them to talk them out of it. And yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the challenges I think you end up having, especially with, the media doesn't really exist. The traditional media doesn't exist the way that people, I think, still imagine what a media would look like, an objective media or even a pretend objective media. The media is generally quite corrupt now. The Seattle Times, obviously, they're never going to report the truth. Como, King 5. Again, there's exceptions occasionally, but for the most part, they just don't report the truth. And so they're being most likely instructed or carefully being educated that you don't report stories that have the potential accident of telling a story that doesn't fit the narrative that Governor Bob Ferguson wants you to have, or that the Democrats in Seattle want you to have, or that Antifa wants you to have, or that the billionaire donors who support many of these Riot Inc. sort of groups that they want you to have, or that the drug cartels that run a sizable percentage of these grant grouping operations to supposedly help low-income housing that they want you to have. I mean, there's a lot of pressures probably that come on them, and so they're not going to report the truth. But imagine if you exist in that bubble and you aren't aware of any other sources of information, and so they're just continually feeding you the same thing over and over. It's very easy to see how in a groupthink kind of setting you're going to basically you're isolated from everyone else has any thought that's different than yours, and you build up this cycle of perpetual outrage or anger or radicalization. It's relatively easy to do. It's been done for a long time. You can go back hundreds of years, the French Revolution. I mean, you can all go back a long time and you can see the stuff that's happened. And so it is hard when you have, I have family members I love that have clearly gone down the yellow brick road of hating Trump beyond all reason. It doesn't really matter to me so much whether they think Trump's great or not. But it's a little weird to have family members that you've known your whole life and you love them, and I still do, but they clearly have stepped in some kind of Trump derangement syndrome to the point where they're almost non-functional in life. And, that's a miserable place to be in, I have to imagine, but their life becomes a lot more miserable because of it, and it's very difficult to have a conversation. Certainly you don't have any political conversations with them generally, but it's very hard for them. And imagine at some point in time in the near future when somebody like that, who is a good person and who can see the truth under the right circumstances, what happens when they get red-pilled and they suddenly wake up? You don't want to have had a history of arguing or fighting with them that got personal, because a lot of that stuff seems to descend into very personal attacks on each other. You don't want to have that history hanging over you if you can avoid it. If they're going to go crazy, it's okay to kind of point out where you think they're wrong and correct them on that stuff. But the best thing to do is just let them stew in it until they come around on their own, from their own perspective, or just carefully. You can ask questions and you can point out things that don't require you to have some kind of a knockdown, drag out, verbal, crazy argument at the, Thanksgiving, July 4th picnic coming up, something like that. And so every family probably has different, family members in there that are going to be having a different opinion. And but it is sad when you see somebody who's really gone down the crazy train road and they're incapable of probably seeing any other perspective. So you're not going to out-yell them or convince them in some kind of an argument that they're wrong. I don't think that's effective, nor do I encourage that at all. You can ask some questions and see if they're willing to look into those things. If it's somebody you've known a long time, and I know people who have had friendships and family members become ostracized because they disagreed politically, but you just give them things to think about, and sometimes they come around to this stuff on their own. Linda, wow. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate all you do for Washington State. Where do you think we can make the most impact for our state as a nobody? Well, number one, none of us are nobodies, but we certainly do achieve more if we can organize ourselves in a group. And you can also achieve a lot more if you're actually engaged or involved in local government. And when I say that, the tendency of most people is to, if you're going to get political and get paid attention to the political side of things, everybody's talking about whatever's happening nationally. And it's understandably because what's happening between Iran and Israel is a big impact. Trump leaving the G7 meeting early seems to be pretty impactful. The crazy bill debates and all of the issues there, whether or not we're actually going to start cutting some of the federal spending instead of just letting the legislators in both houses continue to roll these debt loads further forward. There's a lot of those things that are a big deal, and we should pay attention to it. But your ability to probably change the trajectory or directly impact what's going on in D.C. is probably fairly small. You're one pebble among millions on the beach trying to change what's going on in D.C., and it's difficult. It's difficult to have that individual impact. However, your ability to make an impact at the school board race or make an impact in your local city council is substantially easier. Much smaller number of people, much closer to home, much more logistically straightforward. It's a little bit easier to make an impact there. And so I always encourage people to be more engaged locally and pay attention to what's going on. Because unfortunately, 98% of the population that lives where you live, just like everywhere, they aren't paying any attention at all. They'll pay attention when their house gets robbed. They'll pay attention when their car is stolen. They'll pay attention when they find out their kid's graduating from high school and they can't read. But generally, until that level of personal impact occurs, they oftentimes don't pay attention. We're all guilty of this to some extent. So engaging and being more involved locally, I think, has more of a direct impact in your life, in your neighbor's life, in your kid's life, than being involved in D.C. It doesn't mean you abandon one completely for the other, but your time is going to be better spent engaging and working on trying to fix things at a local level where you have the ability to make that impact than it is yelling at Fox News about what you see going on back in D.C., even if sharing those memes is pretty fun. So that's just my own take on it. You can disagree with me and tell me where I'm wrong. I'm always interested in hearing that. Nathan Danner isn't a pro-life assassin and oxymoron. Yeah, probably. But, listen, it doesn't mean that you can't have people who believe in anything, really, and take that belief system all the way to the point where they believe violence is justified at that point in time. The truth is, when you really sit down and you look at almost any belief system that you have, if you believe in freedom and liberty at a certain point in time, you probably believe in the right and ability to defend that freedom and liberty. And so the question is always where you draw the line between where's your red line, right? You're going to have people on the margins or who are mentally less stable or have been driven to be, down a road that's different than maybe the shoes that you're walking in today, who will decide they're going to go violent or they're going to go do something really crazy or dumb sooner than you or I ever would consider going. And so that's going to create situations that are not good. And you're going to have people who are violent or they go out and do violent and crazy things. I can't imagine, I saw that video, and actually, gosh knows, I actually watched it more than I should have. Brandy Cruz, when she was getting assaulted by the lefties at that protest, the Antifa sort of folk there, they're essentially the foot soldiers for the Democrat Party to some extent. They're the ones that threaten the Democrats more than they do the Republicans, really. And so they're out there, they're violent, they've motivated some of the most unstable people they can find in the community to join with them and convince them that they have nothing else going in their life, and then assaulting people like the way they attacked Brandy or the other journalists there, that's an acceptable and a productive use of their time. And the challenge is you take people, just like those guys that came out of the protests that had confronted me when I was in New York City years ago with baseball bats and chains. And for some reason, they thought that was actually a highly productive use of their time to come out and assault the college students waving American flags, chanting USA at the rally. So long ago, that was the only time I ever did that off campus, actually, was that time. So you're going to have unstable and crazy people that can get motivated and feel important in situations like that. And they usually don't have anything to lose. And so it's hard to imagine being that person in that position who's going to bring change to a protest and then go violently attack people that I don't like. That's just not really something I can conceive of doing. But there's plenty of people whose life is so small and whose horizon lines are probably so limited that they think that's actually perfectly appropriate. And it gets built up and hyped up with the group that they're with. And so then they go out and do things like that. And that's what makes it so dangerous in those types of settings. Let's see. I'm trying to get to questions, guys. So send me, the commentary's fine, but I am trying to find questions. Let's see. Here's one from Jason Fischer. There's a lot of commentary here, guys, but I am trying to get to the questions. Howdy, Glenn. Should we be worried about the Iran-Israel conflict growing, and will the U.S. be pulled in? What you make of the current discussion? Great question. I mean, this is just one of those conflicts that I think most of us saw as fairly inevitable at the international level. Iran wanted the bomb, and they're clearly delivering a nuclear weapon to Israel is a lot easier than even getting it to the U.S., as much as them having the nuclear weapon would be a danger to probably the U.S. and to Israel. One of the problems is the underlying ideology that you have when you have that access to weapons like that, and there is certainly a level of fanaticism that Iran's always had. We haven't gotten along too well with them in the U.S. since 1979. I don't know if you remember, but when they seized the embassy and all those Americans as hostages, I was a young kid at the time, but I still remember the countdown numbers on television at the time. And I remember there was a rock painted somewhere. I can't remember. I don't think it was the Bellingham Rock, but it was definitely one of the rocks in the Puget Sound area like that, where students would typically paint their school colors on it. And I remember one as a kid that said, and it stood out because, of course, it was a bad word, and it was a word that rhymes with truck and starts with F, and it said Iran on it, right? And I remember wondering, first of all, oh, that's a bad word. But also, I was a kid, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, boy, somebody spent their time to go out and go up to this rock and paint all that on it. People were mad. And so there's been obviously quite a division out there. There was probably inevitably going to be a conflict. And, I'd rather not have, I think trying to nation build Iran is suicidal. Americans should not send soldiers in on the ground and try to rebuild Iran. I think that's a terribly dumb and bad idea. I didn't like doing that in Afghanistan. I thought back in the day, I thought going into Iraq was a bad idea. Syria, the same reason. I think trying to send your soldiers in there to force a country to have a government that they don't want in the first place is never going to work. The military is really good at breaking things and killing our enemies. And when you get too far past that, I think you're wasting the militaries and putting American lives at risk. If people are going to do bad things to you, you have to stop them and destroy them and leave. It's not your job to fix them. One of the problems is that we genuinely had success going in and fixing or helping countries like Germany and Italy and Japan after the war, after World War II. And so that seemed to be the model that we were trying to use moving forward. And I just don't believe in nation building. I don't think that's usually going to be a productive use of time. A country has to decide that they're going to be able to recover themselves and find their own way. You're not going to be able to enforce or force government on them in most cases. And so I don't want to be dealing with that in Iran. If Iran loses the ability to have a nuclear weapon, I'm pretty happy about that. I don't think that's a bad thing for society and for our country. And will it change the government of Iran? No, I don't think it would. Will the people have a different type of government moving forward? Possibly, but that's going to be up to them. And frankly, I'd rather see Israel make that changes because of the Hezbollah, Hamas, and Syria sort of conflict, this impact that's been around them. This seems like a logical final confrontation, and I have some level of optimism that when this settles down, that maybe we're going to have a little bit less conflict moving forward, but we'll see. People have been trying to restore peace in the Middle East for so long that I'm not sure that our idea of what peace is going to be what you see in the Middle East anytime soon. But I'd certainly rather not have them with a nuclear weapon. So I'd rather not be sending our soldiers overseas. And listen, I've got kids in the military, so and it's not even about that as much as, if they need to go do a job, they need to go do the job. But it would be better if they are prepared to fight when necessary. But I don't want them to have to go over there and play whack-a-mole with every crazy group under the sun. Let's see. I'm trying to find some questions. I got a lot of commentary back and forth, which is totally fine. People talking about Pioneer Square in downtown Seattle. I will point out this, though. There's a number of people in here that have made comments about Seattle. There's a lot of them. I'm just posting a couple of them up here. And the funny thing about that is that, downtown Seattle has always had its share of problems. My grandfather used to tell me stories of the 20s and the 30s when he was a kid, and he used to work at our family sold flowers, the Pioneer, at the Pike Place Market. They had a flower farm, and it was where Tukwila South Center is today. If you know where the Bahama Breeze is, that was actually the location of my great-grandfather's farmhouse. It was built in 1919, and they would move all their flowers up. Before then, they had one in what's now Rainier Valley. There's actually a Morgan Street there named after one of the family members. I'm not really sure which one for sure. And they had flowers there, and they would haul them up with horse and wagon before they got the Model T Ford later on. And they're hauling flowers up, and they're selling in downtown Seattle. And Grandpa always had stories about the pickpocketers and the prostitutes and the thieves and the criminals and Skid Row and dangerous places you didn't want to be at night, in Seattle. I mean, there's always been issues like that out there. And so the tendency is for people to look back and think of some kind of glamorous, historical, beautiful time that probably never really existed. Now, are we dealing with a crime wave right now? Absolutely. The numbers don't lie on that. We've dealt with crime waves before. There was a terrible crime wave the 60s all the way into the 90s, early 90s. We've had these crime waves before. The urban environments are always going to be where most of that's going to be concentrated. And what is a little different, I think, right now is the amount of tax dollars that we've squandered to probably make it worse. It's like pouring fertilizer on the drug problem, but that's because of how the money's spent and where it's directed through the grant grifting operations that have no desire at all to actually fix the problem, but only grow and make them worse. So I think our solutions, our government solutions, actually are what make it worse there. But Seattle's never been perfect. It's been nicer in the past. I used to take a bus up to Seattle when I was a kid sometimes, but even back then, my mom was worried, But we did take a bus up in Seattle. I don't remember seeing people shooting up heroin on the bus back in the day. They wouldn't have had meth back then or fentanyl, but they would have had heroin if they wanted to, and I never remember seeing that on the bus. There were weirdos, there were bad people on the bus, and I'd been coached to avoid, people like that, only go with a friend, you're watching each other's back, the buddy system, that existed back there too. So, but I think it's always important for people not to imagine some kind of perfect, day in the past that there was never any problem, because that's not really true. It's never existed. That doesn't mean that that's an excuse to have things go to heck in a handbasket right now when you have incompetent and terrible political people making bad choices and terrible policy decisions with predictable outcomes that aren't going to help us or make the community better. So, Jonathan here, let's jump down to this. Jonathan Mitchell, and tell us more about your plan to doge Washington State. And let's start with Bill Gates. Well, Bill Gates is the least of it. People are distracting themselves. I mean, start with your local government. Look at how they spend the money. Always follow the money. Doge Washington is mostly about following the money. People are not paying attention to where the money's going, and that includes people who we've elected office who supposedly have the job paying attention to where that money goes. It is squandered and wasted right and left. It's not always stolen through fraud. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the fraud's legal and it's unethical and dishonest, but it's not, and it's corrupt, but it's not necessarily go to jail fraud. But it's worth exposing, and nobody does. Nobody looks. Most local governments have never had anybody ever really look at them. And I'm not including the state audit, because the state audit is not a real audit. It's just a fake check the box pretense most of the time. I mean, I know they accidentally do discover problems sometimes, but most fraud that's going on, most theft of funds pass county audit or state audits for years, sometimes decades before they're ever uncovered. When they shouldn't even call them audit. They're more like a performance visit that they warn you about ahead of time, and they come out and they pre-negotiate the things they're going to look at, so that if you're at all reasonably capable of stealing money and hiding the truth, you can be prepared for those state auditors when they come out and pass it. I'm only surprised, actually, that they ever catch anybody. But people are stupid, and so they catch the dumb ones. And so the good people that are stealing from government right now, they aren't being caught by anybody, because mostly people aren't looking. But because all financial records in Washington State are essentially public records, you have the ability to get those records. And if you start paying attention to it and finding out where that's going, you have the ability to actually make a substantial change in the trajectory over time, where your local government, doesn't matter with the school board, city council, county commission, fire district, conservation district, state agency. By exposing the waste and just how their money is being wasted, you have the ability to make a change in trajectory more substantial than most people realize. You have to remember, nobody's looking. No one. There's no one looking, and there's nobody coming to save us. This is one of the concerns I sometimes have about Republicans who view Donald Trump as like a messiah, and they think he's going to come in and save us. He's not. He's opened up the door potentially for our ability to maybe make some headway on some of these issues. I think that's a phenomenally good thing, and I'm super enthusiastic about that. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing the Doge Washington training class. It takes a lot of time. I'm meeting wonderful people all around Washington State. I'm excited to do it. I've done this in the past to help people using Public Records Act processes, but you have to start documenting and exposing the truth. And the truth is weirder and stranger than fiction. No crazy theory that you have out there is going to be actually worse, probably, than what the truth actually is, or stranger, because the truth is just almost always stranger than fiction, and worse. And so we just haven't spent the time to look and expose this truth. And it isn't necessarily easy, and nobody's handing it to you on a silver platter with a bow on top so that it makes it simple for you to expose it. But as you learn how to sleuth it out, recruit the whistleblowers, uncover what's actually happening, where your tax dollars are truly being squandered, then I think we have an opportunity to start to make a difference. And Doge Washington is more about the grassroots, people like you and I getting out there and engaging and involving in a local, effective way that we can actually make a difference. Let's see. I'm trying to find questions here. Let's see. How many more years should I waste hoping for change? Well, that's up to you. This is Gizzy Guzzy. If you expect the world to have a 2-hour afternoon Sunday special solution to all the world's problems, including the ones you know, then you'll be disappointed, just like the last 100 generations who have expected the same thing. That's just simply an ignorant and ineffective way, I find, of actually achieving anything. The truth is, if you're not part of the change, then you're irrelevant. It's not going to happen. You have to be engaged and involved. It doesn't take everybody, but it does take a sizable percentage. I know the argument has oftentimes been made that it's 3 to 6% of the population sometimes that they engage and they involved, they can actually make a big difference. And I think that's true, good and bad. If you look at the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks were not a large percentage of the Russian population, and yet they did cause great harm and destruction when they managed to take over. And so the Mensheviks probably outnumbered them at the time, but they weren't as dedicated and focused on achieving their goals. And what happens is when you don't engage and you just expect that somebody else is going to do it for you, then the very fact that you're sitting back, wasting your time doing nothing to achieve nothing, shouldn't be surprised that the change that you're hoping for isn't going to happen because you're not involved or engaged. If you are involved and engaged, try to be as effective as possible, and you can't do it alone. None of us are smart enough, capable enough, wealthy enough, or connected enough to just do it all on our own. It's not going to be that way. It's usually small teams of people dedicated for a period of time. It's usually a changing process where you have small groups of people. They focus on fixing this or that or other things. And there's plenty of stories of people making substantial change many times in the past. You have no place to go. You think you do. Go ahead and run there and see what you're going to find. The person that just got shot and killed in Idaho a couple days ago with a carjacker probably thought he was safe in Idaho, and he wasn't. Bad things can happen anywhere, and unfortunately, if you let things fester and you try to run away from it, it's just going to follow you. There's no way to stop the dumb, bad ideas that are out there unless you stop them. You can't run away from them and think that they'll stop. They grow like a cancer and a disease, and they just spread widely. So you have to confront them and be involved in stopping them yourselves. It doesn't oftentimes take as much work as people think. But it takes some work, and most people will spend more money on the Netflix subscription than they will on making political change. And I would think about that quite a bit, because that's essentially what we see going on is a generally fairly lazy, uninvolved population where apathy and ignorance are generally the primary enemy of liberty and freedom. And the more ignorant and apathetic a population is, the more it opens the door to really bad things happening. This was the whole argument, right, between Orwell and the ideas in like 1984, where that's the dystopian future that Orwell saw. In Huxley's Brave New World, where they would be distracted and happy to live in a despotic sort of environment because they would be distracted and happy all the time with drugs, or give them lows and keep them distracted, right? That kind of thing. And drug them up and distract them with entertainment, and people will let themselves be led like slaves to the slaughter kind of thing. So that was the idea, that the contrast between Huxley and Orwell and dystopian future, and humanity. And yet people, when driven and motivated, can rise up and make quite a bit of difference if they're willing to. But if you're not one of the people doing that and you're hoping somebody else does it for you, that's probably part of the problem. Let's see. I'll take this one. It's not really a question, but it is something. I'm not sure about the immigration thing. Clearly, we do not want violent criminals, but I would like to see fairness with who had the rugs, I'm assuming you're saying who's having the rugs pulled out from underneath them. And yeah, that's a good point. I mean, obviously, most of us would prefer that people go through an immigration system that makes sense in America. But there's been it's not just a neglect, it's a willful structure that's designed to fail from the beginning. And that's probably been a process that we've had now for going back to the 80s. It's only gotten worse because it has been identified by one political party, the Democrats in this case, who've decided that they're going to hang their hat on importing their potential future voters. And it does look like it's been some kind of a leftist objective and plan, which they've openly discussed in many cases, about utilizing immigration as a way to gain political power. The weaknesses of that, of course, is that they can't absolutely guarantee that those people that they bring in illegally or legally, but the ones they bring in illegally in particular, that they're always going to stay on your side. By keeping them illegal, there's probably been some theory that they had that they could always ensure that they would have those votes in the future. But one of the challenges they have had is that the generational change doesn't always stay the way they think it is going to be. And so, but nevertheless, when one political party's married itself to a self-destructive, anarchic kind of policy as it relates to immigration, then you're going to have really negative outcomes. And inevitably, because it's so politicized, then the people who are impacted by it with lower wages, with being victims of crime, with attempting to subsidize through their taxes, and therefore being impoverished by ridiculously high taxes to keep people who stay on the public dole, who are brought in here. This causes resentment, and then you pile on top of it the intersectionality scheme at the left, where they're attempting to divide people up by race or religion and pitting them against each other, and that divide and conquer sort of strategy that tends to work in Marxism. That's kind of their scheme and plan as well. It doesn't create a healthy or a happy society. So yes, most people would agree with you that they'd want to get rid of the sex offenders, the predators, the criminals, the con artists, all the bad people first, but we don't even know how many that is because of the way things have happened. Is it 1 million? Is it 2 million of them? Is it 5 million? Do you include the people who've come in and decided that they're going to take away all the jobs and drive down the wages in America? This is going to be a continuous issue. Right now, we have many millions more that have to be deported before you're probably even beginning to make much of an impact in the process. And so it's going to take a while. And I have no way of predicting all the little twists and turns that we end up going down that road, but at least we've stopped the influx from the border for the most part. I don't think at the northern border so much, but clearly in the southern border we've changed it. And by cutting off some of the overstay of visas, probably cutting off some of the Chinese students' visas that are just coming here clearly to steal from us and go back home. So I don't know. We'll have to see. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on this, but we'll see. So how do you attempt an impact? So Scully, how do you attempt an impact on the local level when your personal record isn't perfect? Politics is played so dirty that even when you have made change, your past overshadows your present. Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're going to run for political office, and I'm assuming that you're referring to some, in day in the past you did some bad things or turned your life around after having fallen off the wagon or something. Many people are in that position, I imagine. And what it means is that you may not be putting your name on the ballot and running for office, but there are 1,000 other things you can be doing. And for every person that's running for office, there's a lot of people that need to go out there and help them get into that position or help lay the groundwork to get into that position. And so if the objective is political change and you don't have a perfect record, that's totally fine. You don't have to be the person to put your name on the ballot. And so that's really the way I would look at that more. It just means that you're not the guy who's going to run for public office. A lot of times people think about that. They say, oh, I'm going to run for public office. That's what I'm going to make change, and so that means I have to run for public office. But the reality is for every person who has their name on the ballot, there's probably hundreds of people behind the scenes making change, sometimes much more permanent and more significant, by helping not just that person, but maybe another dozen people get into public office, or they're laying the foundation for structures that get better people in, or removing bad people from office, or exposing the truth about the corruption in government. There's all kinds of other things to be done. It's not just about putting your name on the ballot and therefore getting background checked and they discover that when you were 20 years old you stole a car or something. And I think that that's part of the deal. Let's see. Here's a question here from Sinera Frankenstein. What would be your breaking point to finally give up the fight and move out of state? I don't know that I have one. That's a great question, but I don't think I'm ever moving. And I'm fairly committed to being here to make the change, especially considering that, at least from what I see, that the change is very possible. People who obsess about politics tend to attach too much value to nuances of how those things are happening there, and then they can't realize that a lot of those things aren't directly impacting you right now. You can still live a good life, still raise a family, still do quite well, still have good friends, still have good neighbors, still enjoy the state, even though you might have some crazy nut jobs in political office. And if you work hard, you can remove them. There's always a cycle he goes through. I think people who always have to run away all the time and they keep zigzagging around the country, I've got friends now that have moved in 5 states. Right? They keep moving in quest for the eternal utopia. And there's an American element to that because most people that settled in Washington, if you look back in their family history, this isn't usually where they first came. On one side of my family, that's here more recent, they came here before World War II because they left Wisconsin and they thought that there were going to be greener pastures up in Alaska, which is where they're planning to homestead. And they got as far as Seattle, sent their dad up. It was my great-grandfather on my mom's side at the time. He decided there were no more good places to homestead in Alaska, came back, and they settled in Washington. So that's kind of an American story, right? There's a lot of people that have done stuff like that. The other side of my family came here a lot earlier, back in the 1800s. So you're going to have different family stories and reasons why people are moving and leaving, and every individual is going to be a little different. I think financially, if you don't think you can make it, you have to go somewhere where you can financially survive. And so, but it's an interesting human nature element where people always think the grass is greener on the other side, and they go and they don't do their homework, and then they end up, they move to Florida and have their house destroyed in a hurricane, right? Or they move to Texas and get heat rash every summer, or they move to Wyoming and then discover that the hotel down the street's turned into a homeless camp, exactly what they thought they were moving away from. Funny things like this. It's kind of human nature. You're more likely, I think, to make progress if you're tied into a community and people know you and they trust you because they've known you for a long time, and you're able to build better networks, better friend networks, more consistent support structures, and you're able to make better progress that way. And so I don't find myself likely to leave because of that. But anyway, so it's a good question. It would have to be really, really bad, and I think we're a long ways away from that. Let's see. Let's keep going down here. Let's see. I was right. That's funny. Surprise attack. Now, this is just a funny story, okay, guys? This isn't a question, but I have to bring this up because I just happened to catch it as I went by. Surprise attack. I was written out of a will for voting for Trump, and then the person, my grandmother, passed away, and she left everything to the state. Well, that is funny. I'm sorry for you, and hopefully it wasn't too much. And unfortunately, every dime she gave to the state got wasted. But that's a crazy story, and that's a good example of people taking politics way beyond the level of rationality. John Fountain, hey, can you help explain Bob's housing plan? Does it actually address the problem of no homes under $600,000 in King County? I'm assuming you mean Bob Ferguson's housing plan. Listen, he has no plan. The plan is to make the housing problem far worse than it was before. No Democrat in the state has a solution for low-income housing problems. What they believe and the policies that they push and the agenda that's on that side of the political spectrum is to enrich a bunch of political insiders who can get wealthy pretending to provide low-income housing. And that's really the whole name of the game here. It's getting subsidized housing, which is the most expensive housing you'll ever find. Let the government pay for it. Maybe go through the Kabuki Theater pretending to actually care and do something for some people that need housing. If they really believe they can bring in drug addicts and they can turn them into meth labs and destroy the house. If they don't, they'll pretend like they're doing something. Half the time it'll sit there vacant. And then eventually when the window of time passes and they've had all these subsidies to have that low-income housing, they'll be able to sell it and make a bunch of money at the end of the day. Bob Ferguson doesn't care. He'll just go through whatever he's told to do by the special interests who think they're going to make a bunch of money pretending to help in the housing side of things. It's the same reason most of the homeless industrial complex, the low-income housing industrial complex, the drug addiction homeless complex, that they're just about collecting cash from you and I and other suckers and taking that and stealing it or manipulating it or using it to their own profit. They don't care about actually helping the homeless or those who have problems. Again, it's different with some of the people on the front lines. There are individuals who have a heart to help people, and those people, they're probably trying to do their best. But the people who are running most of these organizations that kind of come and go all the time, they just don't care. And so most of them are not, there's no real plan. And so you're assuming that they actually have a logical plan, and it's just not there. Jason Fischer, question, who will pay for the damage and the police overtime for LA riots? Easy question to answer. The people that pay are the people who live there and pay the taxes, because that's where the money's coming out of it. It's not your insurance. It's not George Soros. He may pay for the damage that's being caused in your community, but he's not going to pay for cleaning it up or fixing it. Let's see. Nathan Danner, I saw the ferry Wenatchee is back in service. Finally, is the Washington State Ferry viable long term since the Seattle Bainbridge run is the only run that actually makes revenue? Yeah, the ferry system's a lost leader in Washington State. It has been for a long time, and it will be pretty much in the foreseeable future. Nobody's going to make money profiting from the ferry system. The ferry system exists as a public good, kind of like a public pool or something like that. You can't make money on a pool. You can lose less money on a pool, and every 20 to 30 years, you're going to have a big investment where the community is going to put a lot of money into that pool. So you decide that you're willing to lose money because you have a pool that provides a place for kids to play and an escape during the summer and a community good. To some extent, that's what the ferry system is. Not exactly, because it's really part of the freeway system. And so you're investing in this public good so that you have the ability to get up to these islands. I mean, the promise originally when the state took over the ferry system, because remember, it did used to be private, but people were mad. They said that the private ferry system that existed, the Mosquito Fleet in the Puget Sound, was ripping people off, and they were charging too much, and therefore the state needed to step in and provide it for people. And of course, the state charges more than the private system ever did, even accounting for any kind of inflation. And of course, they run it inefficiently and ineffectively for the most part. But it's still something at this point in time that, because of the historical structure that's been set up, the state genuinely is going to have to provide it. You can't take over the ferry system and run it at a profit, from what I can see. And you're right, maybe the Bainbridge run would be like the one exception of that. But for the most part, you're not going to generally run these with any degree of profit. You have other ferries, the Heron Island ferry, for example, a privately run ferry system just to that one island. But even that's subsidized by the people who live there. You have the ferry up in Whatcom County that goes out to Lummi Island, same thing. Subsidized in that case by the county, but it's viewed as an important good, public good, and that's why they're funding it. So all you can do is really just lose less money and run it as efficiently as you can, so that, and safely as you can, so you're providing the public good and you're willing to lose money on it. You can't always profit or have growth pay for growth, which is sometimes just a fake way of justifying overinflated taxes or fees for something that really is just a public good that you're going to have to admit isn't going to make money on it. And you just decide that's what you want to do. You build bridges because you need a bridge, not because you're anticipating making a whole bunch of money on that bridge. Let's see. Denali, do you think in another 10 years the political environment in Washington will be the same or different? Or has the political ideology of the state been permanently changed? Well, these things always go in cycles, of course. I would anticipate it changing. The question is just what it changes to and how it changes. I do think the election system being fixed and corrected in a lot of ways could produce different results. I think that inevitably when the Democrats, who clearly are involved in making crime a lot worse and making life more miserable for a large number of people, and as that's identified and clearly assigned to them as a political party, as something they own, at some point in time, even Republicans can sometimes accidentally take advantage of that and improve and maybe get people in there that are more sane and capable of actually turning things around. That's usually the history of these things. So I would anticipate it being different. What that's going to look like, I don't know. And things do overshadow state level issues at a national level sometimes. The federal debt is a big deal. If they're unable to address the federal debt mathematically or financially in some significant way, and there's a bigger collapse that occurs in society because of that, it really won't matter where you live, except that I wouldn't want to live in a city and I'd rather live rurally. I live rurally now. People who live rurally in Washington State have a lot more in common with somebody who lives rurally in upstate New York or rurally in Florida or Texas or Montana than you would with somebody who lives in Miami, downtown Miami. It doesn't have that much in common with somebody who lives out in the rural panhandle of Florida, for example. But you would have more in common with somebody who lives in the rural panhandle of Florida if you live out in Rochester, Washington. So that's kind of the way. I really think it's more of an urban-rural sort of situation that's going to make a big difference for people. And in that case, I'd much rather live in Washington State rurally frankly, then I would want to live in Minnesota or Montana or places where it gets a heck of a lot colder and much more difficult to live in the winter, or where it's down south, super humid summers, So that's just my own opinion. Jerry Payette, question at We the Govern. The debt we owe, who gets all that money back to? Because as far as I know, not the Fed, as it's known as crooked, not any specific bank, just who gets that cash back, if not back to USA? Good question. I mean, the federal debt level is, well, there's a couple different types of debt. So at the state level, there's a lot of bonded debt that occurs like for capital projects, for example, or transportation projects. And so that's usually bought by private investors. So some of your retirement funds are probably tied up at one point, depending on how far down you look, where they're investing partly in bonds. And so those bonds are oftentimes tied to projects that were built and bonded in debt. And it's a guaranteed return of X over the next 30 years or something like that. So that's going to be a lot of private debt that exists. It's public debt, but it's owned by private entities of some kind, investment companies or something. But they aren't investing that just on just a bunch of billionaires buying it. A lot of it is these big retirement funds that have ultimately directed a lot of their money into some of that debt. Some of it's going to be foreign countries as well. A lot of them, the U.S. debt is owned by foreign countries, Japan, and other places, mainly Japan, South Korea, probably some. I mean, you're going to have other countries that they've bought U.S. debt as part of their investment structure, treasuries, essentially. And then there's a question as how the Federal Reserve, which is kind of a mirage, how they actually own some of this debt and what that means. It's a little unclear to me as some of that stuff gets paid back, like that relationship between the Federal Reserve and the nation's debt, and the debt that's owed out there. But we'll see. So that's a bigger story. Now, theoretically, the state itself, Washington State, doesn't necessarily have that much debt, but there's plenty of it. Let's see. There's funny. I'm trying to get down here. There's a lot of commentary about buy gold, buy Bitcoin, buy brass and lead. Is there enough? There's never enough. Exactly what I'm thinking. That's very funny. A little bit of prepping world out here. Sonera Frankenstein. I'm highly concerned about being taxed. Capital gains tax and property tax into poverty, losing my home and dying in the streets. Aren't you worried about losing everything? Well, sure, everybody is worried about that. Texas right now is jacking up the property taxes beyond recognition in a delusional and self-destructive way, and that's run entirely by Republicans. Property tax is probably the worst. Capital gains tax, income tax, all those types of taxes are particularly bad, and that ability to tax you out of life and limb and home is a problem for sure. So everyone's probably concerned about that, but you can try to run away from that if you want, but I don't see that actually being a realistic outcome for most people. And again, sitting back and assuming somebody else is going to do everything for you is probably not the path to success if you actually want to make that type of change. Let's see. Have you heard anything valid? Don Tanner. Have you heard anything valid about us elderly people receiving some kind of Social Security from Trump? I don't know what you mean by some kind of Social Security from Trump. I do believe that under the Trump administration, from everything I've seen, that probably not a lot's going to change in the Social Security benefits package that exists, or at least the payouts that they have for people who are already collecting Social Security. The question has, and it always has been here, at least for those of us who were wonkish enough to actually dig into this back in the 80s when I was in high school, in the 90s when I was in college, and then after that occasionally when I dabbled in just financial projections in our country, adjustments to the Social Security retirement age are probably a rational and logical approach based on the longevity of how long people live. And it makes planning a little bit harder, of course, if you're younger like me and you, well, yeah, older but younger. I'm not planning to retire for a long time. And so maybe that retirement window that I've decided I'm going to retire at, maybe that's before I'd be allowed to collect Social Security. And so if they change that date gradually as a gradual change over time, I mean, that, based on the numbers I've seen over time, that would make a big difference in the ability of the country to survive economically. There were other changes that seemed to be pretty reasonable. I thought the mid-90s changes to welfare on making it so that it was harder to get welfare without working was a good change for the most part. Making people do something and work and encouraging them to get back to work, it really had a substantial impact. And the left hated that. They blew up over that, if you remember. So that I think that's around some of the stuff that really could make a pretty big impact on reducing that trajectory of debt long run. But of course, there's a lot of problems with having incompetent clowns and corrupt people in government, because they're not going to fix the problem. So I think it's actually not a good idea. I think it's a good idea to remove those people. And then one of the things I believe in is a much smaller government. Government isn't the nanny state. They shouldn't be. And I think removing them from whole categories of involvement in people's lives is a good plan if we could do it. The planning departments are bad. A lot of these departments could really be changed quite a bit. Let's see. Salty Raiders fans, comes down to know your neighbors, especially the Dems. When and if it hits the fan, well, be on good terms with your neighbors. That's usually a good plan, and know them well. And I think that's always a good idea. Edward Miller, no tax on Social Security or tips. Maybe that's what you meant with that question that I had earlier there. If so, I'm sorry I missed that point that you were trying to make. But at least the proposals that have been bounced around, I do not know if they're actually going to be what comes through, is to not have federal tax on Social Security payments, which is fine because it's double taxation anyway, or tips, which I think that's got to be a little bit harder to enforce. I like both ideas. Anything I can do to reduce the tax rate is a good plan. I'd also really, more importantly, even on top of that, is to really reduce expenses. So there's a lot more that we have to do. But I like that idea of reducing the taxes, period. Let's see. Deneen, how can I expose Bob Ferguson corruption? Please help. Well, you're going to have to start getting involved and engaged and find out what he's doing. One of the challenges is that, so you have somebody get into public office, elected to governor, as Bob Ferguson has been, and he's only in there for so many months, and then exposing his corruption at this point in time, he hasn't had enough time to really do something really openly, obviously, demonstrably useful in the way of a corruption expose. You could probably do that for his time in the AG's office if you had access to that information. The difference between the AG's office, the Attorney General's office, where he was before, and the governor's office now is there's a little bit more transparency and a little bit more difficulty with him concealing information in the governor's office compared to his repeated efforts, mostly probably successful, in destroying and hiding records when he was the Attorney General's office, because they could hide behind a variation of attorney-client privilege stuff all the time. And so that's kind of an issue here. So let's see. I'm going to have one more question down here, and then I think your questions are good. We've had some good questions today, but also it's been about an hour, 10 minutes. I usually try to close it out. At least today, I didn't have the camera go all fuzzy on me, so I think that's useful. And here's the last question that I have right now for the night. Jerry Payette, thank you for answering my question, Glen Morgan, and thank you for your help. Well, that was easy. You're welcome, and I don't remember which question that was you had up there, but I'm glad I could help you. And again, just a quick reminder as I kind of close this out. If you're going to one of the Doge trading classes, please make a point of coming up and talking to me. If you have more specific questions, have those ready next time for next week's live stream. I do believe that we're going to be doing that Tuesday. That seems to be the schedule that we're getting back on right now. I realize it's a beautiful summer. Life goes on. People who obsess too much about politics, even though I live it every day, I think you have a much harder time in life if you're trying to attach your happiness to the success and failure of the political class around you. You're more important to tie up your life, I think, in helping your family and your community do better. I find a lot more happiness tied up in that. I just had my two youngest kids graduate, and they're from high school, and they did running start. They're graduating tomorrow from community college. Makes you feel good to just see your kids moving up and join. My daughter's the Air Force Academy Army right now. I'll have a younger son probably going there another year. So you have, the more the cycle of life kind of continues and the more you visually see it, the more I appreciate what my great grandma told me many years ago back in the 90s when I was talking to her, that as much as you think that you're coming to horizon lines in life and that the end is there, you'll find that there's still a tomorrow, and there's always something new that comes up, always more opportunities, good, bad, and tough at different times. And it's just a matter of hopefully putting together logical and rational plans for how you live your life. I just don't think it's a good idea to assign your happiness to the political arena too much. You still have to stay involved and engaged because they affect you whether you want them to or not. But if you don't like how things are going, be engaged and start to be part of the change. Don't just presume somebody else will be doing it for you. So with that, guys, that's my little help for the evening. And 5:30 will probably be the time of our live stream next week, Tuesday. That's my current plan. I'll let you know if something comes up sooner. You have 2 videos I have coming out. One of them is going to be the one on the No Kings protests this weekend, and the second one's going to be about the Pierce County battle between the sheriff and the prosecutor. It's a little wonkish, but I'll be curious in your feedback after that gets up there, and I'll keep you posted, hopefully, on the new studio as that process gets going. I know we're months away from that being finished, but it'll be interesting to see how it goes. And I probably have some transition stuff that I'll be doing in the meantime. But for now, guys, thank you so much for watching. And always engage, be involved out there, pay attention to your family, get to know your neighbors, as somebody mentioned here earlier. I think that does help. And we'll see you next time, and enjoy the weather, as it is pretty nice right now, almost no matter where you live in Washington. And we'll see you next time.